driving a wrecker. And he's a kind of a long-haired, kid.
Like Greg?
A little younger than me. Well, no, he was a skinny, kind of a long-haired kid, and he had a good job. And somehow or another, his fingers were a little sticky, and I think they caught him stealing some oil or something. Not a lot of oil, but just a little oil. And so they took him in the office, and they says, we ought to let you go, but we're going to give you another chance. Tyler probably remembers this story because he remembered about everything I say. But he says, okay, so he managed to hang on to his job, but he promised he would never steal anything else. Right? Well, one day, there was a cigar box that disappeared out of the cashier's office that had $1,700 in it. The dealership dealer principal was not really happy about that. He was pretty chill. And so right away he had everybody that had a key to the shop and had access to the shop after hours take a lie detector test. Yeah, he paid to have them take a lie detector test where they had to sit in there and they had all this stuff to ask you questions, see if you're stressed out or whatever. And the service manager at the time had been there 27 years. And he told him he wanted him to take a lie detector test too. Of course, I don't think a service manager would have done that because he had money he had never seen. And I don't think he would have stolen anything anyway. But he said every single person that's got access to the shop after hours, and I didn't have a key, so he didn't have me take a lie detector test. One of the truck mechanics had a key because he would come in early in the morning and he would start working at like 4 in the morning. And he turned a lot of hours because of that, because he was putting in 12, 15-hour days because it was his choice. He wanted to, so it's lots of work and he's making a lot of money. But anyway, because so he went, everyone took a lie detector test. The service manager initially told him he wasn't going to do it, and so the dealer principal said, well, you're not going to take a lie detector test, you're gone. And this guy been working there nearly 30 years, and he's going to fire him because of that thing. So he said, well, okay, I'll go take a lie detector test. So, but anyway, but before he did all of that, let me hit you with this. Before he did all that, the first thing he did was to fire the guy that stole the oil.
Oh, he fired him?
It was 2 years later. The guy had been working 2 years, and he says he's going to do a clean sweep. He says, you stole something one time before, and you got keys to the shop, and whether or not you stole that money, you're gone. And he just fired him. Poof. See, this guy thought, well, I'm going to keep my nose clean. You see, and I'm not going to get, and I'm okay with that. Well, anyway, when the smoke cleared and they figured out who done it, it was the cashier. And they had hired this girl without really vetting her. I guess, I don't remember, I don't know how they found out, but I did hear the end of the story was they found out that it was this girl and she had actually stole money from other places she had worked. But they didn't call to find out if she was trustworthy when they hired her. But she was too tempted by this money, and it's to be tempted, grab this stuff and run with it because nobody's going to pay any attention. Nobody will be able to figure out who it was. And so anyway, she was already gone too. She had already quit the job. That was what was amazing. But she took it and then quit. And I don't know why they didn't come together. But the point is, even though they found out that this guy that drove the wrecker didn't steal the money, he didn't get his job back.
Yeah, he had it coming.
Yeah. Now there's these other guy. When I was over there one time just visiting around and getting oil changed in my Jeep, because sometimes on Fridays I'd go over there in the afternoon and I'd hang out with a mechanic, talk to the service manager, people I knew from over. The service manager came to me and he says, one of my porters, who's the guy that pulls the cars around, has been, I think, stealing money out of people's cars because people will have money in their coin holder and, their cup holder, like that stuff. And he said, we've had more than a few people come back and say they've got money missing out of their change holder. He doesn't take it all, he just takes some of it. And they know that they've got, 7 or 8 quarters in there. Now there's 2 or 3 and this kind of stuff, not huge amounts of cash. And so they said, and so what the service manager did was he came to me and he says, I've got 4 quarters here. He said, I noticed you got a bunch of change in your change holder. He said, I've got 4 quarters here. And he says, and I'm going to color them around the side with a black magic marker. Now, if you look at them, you don't notice that. You just see 4 quarters. But if you color them around the side with a magic marker, they're marked, and you can tell which quarters they are. And so he says, now I'm going to put these 4 quarters in your coin holder, and I'm going to have this guy pick up your car from the service lot, bring it around, and pull it into the. Cause that's the only time he was ever in the car. You see, pull it into the dealership, and for you to pick it up. And so I said, that's fine, whatever, So anyway, I was standing there when the guy pulled up in there, and he got out to walk over to the cashier's window to give them the key or piece of paperwork or whatever. And as soon as he got over there, the service manager come up and said, take this stuff out of your pockets and put it on the counter here. And so the guy pulled the stuff out of his pockets and put it on the counter, and there was 3 of those marked quarters in his pocket.
You get all of it. You got 3.
He got busted. Yeah, he left enough in there to where he was hoping somebody wouldn't notice. Now, the thing I'm trying to say is, if you get in somebody's car, you may see a little 16-pack of juicy fruit chewing gum. You need to set a goal for yourself that you're never even going to take a piece of that. See what I'm saying? Leave their stuff alone. You know what I mean? Now, sometimes you have to empty the console because you got to pull the console out because you got in to do work on the wiring or whatever, or do a recall or something. And I used to take everything, I'd have a cardboard box, and I'd pull everything out of the console, and I'd take the console out. When I put it back in, I would take all of this stuff they had in the console, because it's usually just crammed in there, and I'd stack it in there real neat. And so that it was really nice and neat, but nothing, and even their little receipts from Hardee's and all, I'd put them in a Ziploc bag and put them separately, so that whenever they opened it up, oh gosh, somebody straightened all this out for me. But people will leave money in their cars, they will leave guns, they leave all kinds of stuff that you could just steal if you wanted to.
I've seen that happen before.
And I was telling this one lady whose car was in here for work, I said, look, we found your Smith & Wesson 38 in the glove box, and I was just kidding, I was just picking at her, And she said, well, that's supposed to be under the seat.
Oh, man.
I mean, I didn't even know she had a gun in her car, but I just said that. That's kind of funny. But there's another guy that was a front-end mechanic that was taking change out of people's cars. And they suspected him because they tracked it in every car he worked on. That seemed like people complained about it. Nobody else had. And so the fixed operations manager laid some change up in there on the console on his daughter's car and pulled it in there and had the guy do an alignment. And nobody else got in that car, and he found that money in that front-end man's pocket. And that little bit of money that they stole got him fired. The guy that had the marked quarters, he handed him his final paycheck right there and said, you're out of here. Just go on. Well, see, and he had to go find another job, and then he also had to fill out the paperwork that he got fired for stealing. Or whenever somebody calls and says, why did you let this guy go? If you got that on your name, buddy boy, you got some serious issues. Furthermore, if I'm trying to place somebody, see, I don't know who stole the stuff that's been stolen here. The timing light. I went looking for those little digital multimeters, and I couldn't find but one. All the meters we used to have around here, the little $10 meters, they don't cost very much. I mean, this is not a felony offense, but I found one. I couldn't find but one. Is all I can find. And do you know how many times I've had test lights laying all over the place, and several of them on the top of the box, and all of a sudden I go looking for a test light, and all the test lights are gone. Have you seen this again and again?
That's happened so many times.
Yeah, I mean the test lights don't cost but $3 or $4. Well, where the sound hell are they going? What's the point in all that? You see what I'm saying? All right, now this is the other thing. If you build a pattern in your own character, whoever you are, and I know whoever stole this stuff knows they've got it. But if you build this pattern in your character, you're not going to be able to resist it if you have an opportunity to steal something you think they won't miss from the place where you're working. That's just the way that is. You know what I mean? You have to set a standard for yourself that's so high that they'll never be able to say you stole anything truthfully. See what I mean? And furthermore, this is something else. Transparency. If you're working on something and you damage the car, like you bend the paint or you scratch the paint or do something that makes or something like that. Yeah, but I mean, if you ever damage the car, you need to go to whoever's in charge and say, I damaged this car. Anytime you try to lie your way out of anything, you're going to wind up causing them to not believe nothing you say. And that is not good. To be in a situation, whenever you're in a situation where they can't trust you not to steal and they can't trust you not to lie, then you're somebody that's going to be unable to find a job there after a little while, because nobody wants somebody working for them they can't trust. And so, but anyway, you might in the beginning get something you can use and have fun with for a little while. But there's another little thing. There was a boy that I grew up with. Well, you know, my mother worked at a military base out there as a Troy State University, had a branch at Fort Rucker. And she went out there, and there was all these military officers and everything were always coming through there taking courses. And there was a pair of these military flat glasses, like the helicopter pilots wore, the wire rim sunglasses, you know, that come straight back. And somebody left them on her desk, and they stayed there for a year. She didn't know whose they were. She kept figuring somebody'd come back in there and get them, but they're issued by the military anyway, and so they just go get another pair. They didn't know where they left them at. So she brought them home and gave them to me. Nobody claimed them. Boss man said, you can have them if you want them. Nobody's claimed them. I don't know whose they are. So she brought them home. She gave them to me. So I had these sunglasses. I was real proud of them. And I wore them to church, you know, and I took them off. And this boy wanted to see them. He wanted me to hand them to him and let him look at them. And so I handed them to him. These were brand new. I mean, they were beautiful glasses. And everybody wanted these things. Everybody wanted a pair like this, you know, because they were hard. They weren't all that hard to come by, but they were real cool, you know, because they're helicopter pilot glasses. And so he wouldn't give them back to me, and somehow or another he got out of there and went back home because he didn't live far from the church. And when he came back, he gave me back a different pair of glasses that were old and wore out and had pieces missing off of them and all that. And I never could get him to give me back the new ones, but he swapped with me. And that guy had that character flaw. Everything else he did, he didn't drink, he didn't cuss or any of that, but he was a thief. He had it in him to steal. You see what I'm saying? Okay, years later, he may have grown out of that and got to where he didn't. Somebody stole stuff from him that was really important to him. And what it amounts to is, he was living in a different city. It wasn't anybody related to anything he had stole in his early life. What goes around comes around. If you steal from somebody else, they're going to steal. Somebody else is going to steal from you. So you're not helping yourself when you steal anything. It's just a little pep talk I'm giving about, you know, not stealing anything. And also, I don't know it, the mechanics that I knew down over the years that would get paid for putting parts on a car that they never put on it. Front end parts that nobody even thinks about looking at and all that kind of stuff. And whenever this one old mechanic died, and they were cleaning out from under his bench, they found boxes of brand new parts under there that he had been paid to put on. And he never put them on. And that ain't good either, you know. This one guy, Ryan, was the guy that I was training from high school. And we had this this Mustang that we were working on. And it was out of warranty, but it was a really nice Mustang. And this Mustang had you heard me tell this story before, but I'm going to tell it again. Wire connector, plugging into the alternator, damaged, wouldn't stay. It was jiggling loose and all that. Couldn't get a pigtail for it in those days because the car was too new, and nobody had produced a pigtail for it yet. I mean, it was physically impossible. There was none of those cars in the salvage yard yet. You know, if there was, they wouldn't sell any wire harness parts off of them. You know, and so we found out the only way we could get this car fixed was to buy a $275 wire harness. So we go to the customer and we say, we can fix this car. And I don't know how the connector got damaged, but one way or another, I said, you're going to have to buy a $275 wire harness for us to do. And he said, well, I want the car right. You know, it's a nice car. He said, go ahead and get me the wire harness. And so the high school student I was training was looking at this big old wire harness and, man, it went under the manifold. It went it's aggravating the son of a gun to change out. It's terrible. I mean, it's just an awful job. And everything else on that wire harness was pristine. It was perfect. And the connector that we needed to change was right up in the front on the top, right on top of the alternator. Just real easy to change. And I says, what are you thinking about, Ryan? He says, well, wouldn't it be easier if we just clipped this off, clipped that one off, soldered this on, did a good job of it? I said, I know, but he wouldn't get this wire harness he paid for. And we're getting paid 5 hours labor to put the wire harness on because we got to pull the intake manifold off and all that kind of stuff. You know, now we could sneak around and get by like some guys have and fix. The car would be fixed, but let's talk about integrity here. If the guy's paying for a wire harness, he needs to get a wire harness. He needs to get a new wire harness. Even if his ain't got nothing wrong with it, we need to put this one on there. We need to route it right. We need to do the work. And he said, yeah, I guess so. And so we busted our rear end, we put that wire harness on there, and he had a new wire harness. Of course, we had the old harness, which he let us have, and it had a whole lot of other connectors we could use on other cars when the connectors were damaged. Well, a year later, I went back over there after I came to teach here, and I saw him up there, and he's a big, heavy-set guy, and he had these underwears that had the words "fix it, fix it, fix it, fix it" on the band, which was funny. I don't know where he got those from, but you know, he had plumber's fanny anyway. Yeah, he'd bend over and his pants would go down. I mean, he just couldn't keep his pants up because he was so big, you know. But he was laying up on top of this Expedition, feeding his wire harness down through there. And I said, "What are you doing there, Ryan?" He said, "Well, I could have just cut the one connector off and put it on there, but I got to thinking about integrity, and I decided I'd put this wire harness on here for him." He got fired, but he wasn't happy with him guys. So, but anyway, you need to be the one that can always trust to tell the truth, always trust to do your job, always trust them to tell when you mess something up. Say, "Look, I messed something up," so the customer don't have to find out about it, and then there's more flashback whenever you try to cover it up, and then the customer says, "Look what your mechanic did." And they say, "Wait a minute, why didn't you tell me about this?" You see what I'm saying? And one day the general manager of the dealership, we had a service manager for a while he was a good service manager, did a lot of stuff that needed to be done, but he was a little bit of a shyster, and he'd try to convince somebody that came back, you know, trying to act like there was a problem with the repair. He'd try to convince them that, no, I wasn't a problem with the repair, you just need to get on out of here with your bad self. You know, he didn't say those words, but he basically would, you know, and so he went to the big boss, and the big boss had the service manager out there, and the service manager was talking smack, and so the big boss sent him to get me, because he knew I'd talk straight with him. I didn't have any axe to grind. But he went out there and he said, they said that we broke this ignition module. Let me tell you what kind it was. You see this right here? It was an ignition module just like this one. Right there. And on this one right here, when somebody's setting the timing, you know, this thing would be like that. They'll loosen this bolt, and they have a propensity to want to pry on it to turn it. And what they'll do is they'll start to tear this loose from that plate, and that may last for a year before the module ever fails because of that. And when I saw, and the general manager and the man that owned the car were standing there, it was a Grand Marquis, and he says that nobody's worked on this car since we worked on it, and that he says that the guy that fixed this for him whenever the car quit running said that whoever worked on the car last had broke this. And I looked at it and I saw what had happened. I've seen that a zillion times, you know.
Can't turn it with your hand?
Huh?
Can't turn it with your hand?
Well, not when it's got all varnish and crud around down here. All right, and what I always tried to do was I would go right here against this little boss or against that little thing right there, and I'd get like a screwdriver and tap it, because you're not going to hurt it beating on that. And in some cases, it's real tight and you can't turn it. But people will try to turn it by prying on this, and they will rip that sucker right off of there. And that was $100 part in those days. So they don't cost that much now. But the fact is, the general manager said, what I'm wanting you to do is I want you to investigate this as good as you can and see if you think we did this. Now, we had the man that ran that dealership, all he was interested in knowing was the truth. He wanted to know, did we tear this up or did we not? So I went back there and I pulled a file on that car because it was filed by serial number. And I looked at the repair order and I looked at the mechanic's name that did it and what he had done. And I put it back and I say, I'm going to say that we probably broke this, because that guy was a kind of a yo-yo. He was real rough with stuff and he had a tendency to break things anyway. And I say, my judgment on this is I'm going to say that we probably broke it. And so the general manager took the guy that owned the car back to the cashier's office